Megan Friesen. I am an occupational hygienist with OHCOW. I'll be leading today's session. And let's start with, to give you a sense of the agenda for today, we'll do a little 4 to 5 minute presentation on the health effects of silica. We'll get right into a demonstration of the tool that will take about 30 minutes. And I will try to pause throughout for questions. And if not, we should have a good amount of time at the end of the session to answer any questions you may have. So the Silica Control Tool was originally an online application developed by the British Columbia Construction Safety Alliance in 2017 to support the BC construction industry. An Ontario version of the tool was funded by the Occupational Health Clinics for Ontario Workers to bring this tool to Ontario, to the Ontario construction industry in 2023 in partnership with the BCCSA and also with Ontario's Infrastructure Health and Safety Association. So silica, what is silica? Silica can be considered the second most common mineral making up the Earth's crust. It consists of and makes up a major component of sand, rock, and mineral ores. And silica can exist in two forms, a crystalline form and also a non-crystalline form. That non-crystalline form is known as amorphous. The way to transfer from one form to the other is typically done by means of high heat. But when we are considering silica for the purposes of this session, we will be focusing on crystalline silica, as it is known to be the most hazardous to our health. So over the last few years, there has been an increased awareness of the health effects of silica. Various illnesses have been found linked to silica exposure. For example, lung cancer and silicosis. Silicosis is an incurable lung disease condition characterized by the progressive scarring, thickening, and hardening of the lung tissue. It's characteristically marked by shortness of breath and impaired lung function. Chronic silicosis typically occurs or presents itself 10 to 20 years after initial exposure to respirable crystalline silica. However, acute silicosis can occur after high exposures over a shorter duration of time. Silicosis can even develop or progress after the workplace exposures have stopped. Other illnesses include chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, chronic kidney disease, rheumatoid arthritis, scleroderma, which is an autoimmune disease causing the thickening of the skin and inflammation of joints, tendons, and other tissues. And silica exposure also shows a positive association with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, sarcoidosis, which is an inflammatory disease. And when high exposures are taken into consideration, you can even have potential esophageal cancer and gastric cancers. So where is silica found? Well, it's one of the most common construction worksite hazards. And here are a few examples of silica concentrations in common construction materials. Concrete and concrete blocks can contain up to 30% silica. Ceramic tiles can contain between 5 and 45% silica. Brick can contain up to 30% silica. Mortar can contain anywhere from 25 to 70% silica. Sandstone, if you're working between 70 and 90% silica. Granite, the stone of granite, can contain between 25 and 60% silica. Slate contains between 20 and 40% silica. And finally, artificial or engineered stone can contain anywhere from 40 to 95% silica. So how are workers exposed? Well, respirable crystalline silica dust is produced during work processes that may damage or disturb silica-containing materials. Those processes include processes like digging, blasting, grinding, drilling, breaking, or sawing. Silica is also used sometimes as an abrasive, as an insulator, and as a filler in a number of other industries. So that ends our quick presentation. And as I end the slideshow, I'm going to transition over to the live demonstration of the tool. So here we are, and this is the login page. Before we take a look at the login page, I wanted to make sure everyone knows how to create an account in case you don't have an account already to access the Silica Control Tool. If you go to OHCOW's website or you Google OHCOW Silica or Silica Control Tool, this is the landing page, and there are 3 buttons at the top of the page. If you have an account, you can click here to sign in. If you don't have an account yet and you happen to know the WSIB number for the company for which you work, you click here. And for all other requests, click register with OHCOW. And these 3 buttons will take you to locations where either you sign in or you can request an account. Now here I have an account, so if I was to click the sign in button, this is where it would lead me. If you click the sign in button, you can always click create account, and that will take you to a different page. But this is the login page. My password and login are saved, so I will log in. And here is the dashboard page. This is the main page upon login. It's also called the dashboard. So what you'll notice over here is you have 2 little left side menu options. You have dashboard. If you click dashboard, it takes you right back to the main page. And if you click account information, this is your opportunity to pre-populate information that will be included as part of the deliverable from using the tool. It's called an exposure control plan. And what it does is it takes your information, company information, in this case, I have my personal information, and it will prepare it and add it to particular locations within that exposure control plan. If you have a company logo and you choose to upload it, as I did here, this will then put your logo at the top left-hand side of the page for every page of your exposure control plan. So if you want to make any edits, you can add a phone number, update the address. Here I used our headquarters in Toronto. You can save company info and all that information in your account information. You'll see it here as well, but it will populate throughout the tool. So if I wanted to get back to my dashboard, I can either click here or I can click here right up on top where you have the options to either sign out or return to dashboard. And you'll see this upper, I'll call it the upper right-hand menu. You'll see this throughout your plan. As you open a project or a plan and you continue on, you'll see a different left side menu, but this very top banner will stay consistent. So let's say we wanted to start a new planning from scratch. You click here and it prompts you for what you want to do, and you would click start. Perhaps I want to start a new plan by importing data I already have. Then what you would do is you'd have to scroll down to the bottom of the page where you already have exposure control plans created and saved, and you could click import so you don't have to go through all the legwork of recreating an almost identical task when you are tasking it perhaps to a new location, or perhaps you just want to make an address change and you need to have that original occurrence in your exposure control plan. We'll call it dashboard down here. You can import the data and start a new entry from that data you had already put in. You could open an existing planning project, which is what we're actually going to do today, and update your account information. Well, this takes you back to the same page that we just saw where you can update your account information. So here we have my dashboard, which shows all the potential plans I've created. You could scroll through them. You could take a look at as many pages as you have. The tool will automatically save your progress as you progress through the pages. There are 23 pages that ideally you progress through to get to the very end deliverable, which is a printable, downloadable PDF document called the Exposure Control Plan. So let's go to open, and it will give you a prompt. It'll tell you quickly which project this was. My job site is building 123. This is the one I wanted to go into. So let's open this project. So now you're on your first page, and what you'll see here is you always have the option to sign out and go back to your dashboard, but your left side menu has now changed. So what you'll see here are what I'll call the larger sections are here, and you'll have introduction, silica process, exposure control, and you'll see these grayed out options as well, all the way down to conclusion. Under each of these larger sections, there are individual pages or subsections, and you can use this left side menu to navigate your way through pages you might have already completed. So if you see a green check mark, that means that I have already been on this page and I've completed, inputted, and saved data. And if you see a grayed out selection with a little lock symbol, that means I cannot click on it. I have to go back to the previous page and continue from where I left off if I want to progress through to get to, let's say, documentation or conclusion. I do need to complete these sections in gray. So you're gonna encounter different types of pages. You'll have some pages where your activity is to read. There's no data required. There's no inputting or selecting. Instead, you have text that's explaining a little bit about the tool. This is the welcome introduction page. You could click all of these blue All of these blue text items are hyperlinks, and they'll take you to some are internal links, a few are external links to provide you with more information if you need that. And here we get onto a Get Prepared. You'll notice there'll be Get Prepared pages under almost every one of the main sections. And on the Get Prepared page, you're going to see a path, as they call it, a path forwards. And so wherever you're located in red, you'll see a little red circle on both the left side menu, but also here. It shows me along the path using the main section header titles, which correspond to those down here, where you are on the progress of your exposure control plan. Well, I'm still in the introduction. And so on this page, it gives you a quick breakdown of how the tool is going to facilitate and help you get through this path. So first, the tool is going to ask and collect information about the job site and the planned activity. Step 2 will be that the tool will analyze a risk, and it'll provide you with an estimated exposure level calculation of your inputted data from step 1. Step 3, the tool is going to suggest to you appropriate engineering controls and administrative controls that you may want to consider or add to your plan as a way of controlling exposure. Step 4, it'll recalculate your estimated exposure level using selections you made in step 3 to see if your selections have indeed potentially, based on an estimate, dropped the potential exposure risk of silica dust in the air. And step 5 will be the deliverable exposure control plan PDF that then you can download and save to your computer, and then you can use that to train to or to send in an email to, let's say, workers on a site or a supervisor. This page here, employer details. As we saw in the account information back in your dashboard, any information you've populated in there will be carried over here to save you those extra steps. The reason why they have this page here is it does give you the opportunity to potentially change, let's say, the ECP contact name for this one particular site is going to be someone else. Let's say it's going to be a different supervisor. Well, here I have the opportunity to put their name in instead of mine, and their contact phone number and their email address. Now we're about to start into another section. So you'll see on the Get Prepared page, it is showing you the section you have completed and which section you are about to start into. I'll pause here briefly to see if there are any questions in the chat.
No questions in the chat right now. If anyone has a question, you're welcome to unmute right now to ask or put it in the chat.
Great, thank you. So again, some pages won't require you to do any information inputting. Instead, it's to educate or provide information or allow you the opportunity to read about what the next step will be. Job site details. So this will be a location where you put in specifically, I'm going to be sending my workers to, or I'm working at building 123. You could put in the address, city, province, and postal code. This information will be carried over and will be added to your exposure control plan, which is that last step deliverable. But what's quite important on this page, whenever you see drop-down menus, you want to select from these options. And in this case, job site sector, you can select from civil engineering and roadwork, industrial, institutional, and commercial, or residential. For the purposes of our mock exposure control plan, we'll select industrial, institutional, and commercial. And then it'll also prompt you for a construction project type. And you only have 3 options as well: new construction, renovation, or demolition. We're going to select demolition. And the reason why you want to select, when you see drop-down menus, starting at this page here, the job site details, you want to make a selection. Even if it seems fairly broad and perhaps you're not quite sure where your project fits in, make your best guess, because what happens is this tool is powered by data. It's powered by actual respirable crystalline silica personal sampling data somewhere up in the cloud, and there are about 4,000 to 5,000 data points. And so if we imagine this is our data points, what will happen is as you make selections within these drop-down menus, and we'll see a couple of more on the next 2 pages, that data that you have in the background that's powering this tool is full of data for all sorts of scenarios. And as you narrow down your job site sector and your construction project type, you're going to go from 5,000 data points to 4,000 data points, let's say, to perhaps 3,000 data points. And so you're narrowing down your selection, and that end selection of data points will be very precise and very relevant to the type of material tool and procedure and process that you're going to be selecting. So while it may not actually prompt you, it may not prompt you, and it will potentially allow you to click continue without selecting a job site sector or construction project type. Just note when you see drop-down menus, this is where the data is going to start to narrow down to be able to give you the best estimated exposure concentration or level that we're going to see when we get to the silica exposure section here. You can also pick a start and an end date for your work. This won't affect the data that's pooled. It's just more so for you to be able to provide more information on your exposure control plan. Work activity. All right, so this is where we have drop-down menus. So we will be forced, on this page, you will be forced to select one in each of these drop-down menus. And what we have here, you always want to start with selecting your material. So there are 15 materials that you can select from: artificial stone or granite countertop, asphalt, cementitious material, concrete masonry unit like concrete blocks, then construction dust, drywall, a fiber cement board, gypcrete, marble granite, mortar, rock, and in this case it says drilling machine because it's the data will lend itself specifically to using a drilling machine on rock, sand, and earth, so more so like rock, sand, and earth moving, and then shotcrete, and then tile. So these are your 15 options. So for example, let's say you're looking for brick. Well, brick won't be there, and that's simply a limitation of the tool. The tool can't show us data or provide us a calculation if the data itself, those 5,000 data points that power the tool, if it doesn't lend itself to that specific type of material, you're not going to see it listed here. It's simply a limitation of the tool. In this case, we're going to select concrete. And once you make a selection here, your next drop-down menu for select task is going to limit your options. In this case, for concrete, we have many options because concrete is a pretty commonly disturbed construction material. But if you were to select something like gypcrete, for example, you may only see one selection simply because the tool itself can only present you results based on the data that it has. So in this case, we are going to select cutting with a walk behind saw. And then lastly, select tool. In this case, as you can see, because I have made my first two selections, the tool can only work within the data limit that it has. So it's telling me right here, I can't select anything but walk behind saw, concrete cutting. So here we have made our 3 selections. I will click continue. And now it's going to ask you for just a little bit more information on how you anticipate the activity will occur. So 2 more drop-down menus, and then we will be on to our calculation. So we have an inside, an outside, and a restricted space option. So will the work be occurring inside a building, outside a building, or potentially by restricted space, they mean anything from a tunnel, a hallway, to a confined space type environment. I'm going to select inside, and then work activity duration. Again, only 3 options: less than 4 hours, 4 to 8 hours, or more than 8 hours. In this case, we'll select less than 4 hours. In a perfect world, we'd have data for half an hour, 1 hour, 2.5 hours. But unfortunately, the tool itself, it does have some limitations. And because of the way that the data lends itself, the developers on the IT side have had to pull data in this fashion instead of allowing us to click or select very specific timelines for work duration. Here's our last page under Silica Process. It provides you a quick summary of your selections that you've made. If you'd like to edit anything, you could click on these blue buttons. Will take you back to the page that corresponds to these pages on, and you can make edits. Otherwise, I'll click continue, and we'll be taken to another Get Prepared page under Silica Exposure. You'll notice there's only 2 pages under Silica Exposure because, again, this is an informational page that will give you a little bit of information about what is about to occur next. And this is when the tool will take the selected data based on the user's inputs. It will select data in the background that we can't see, and it's going to provide us with a very nice visual of where it estimates that worker's exposure to crystalline silica dust, what it might be. So here we are. The dial is arguably one of the best visuals in the tool. It can tell you, the user, a worker, a supervisor, a manager, really quickly. Anyone who's using this this tool where that worker's exposure may very well be sitting as a result of the activities they're doing. In which case, this is cutting concrete with a walk-behind saw inside for less than 4 hours. This is where we're sitting. So the estimated exposure level in milligrams per cubic meter of air is 1.4. But how does that compare? That's just a number. How does that compare to the occupational exposure limits of Ontario? And what we are using is the more stringent of the two occupational exposure limits for silica in Ontario of 0.05. This is a best practice tool, so this is why we're using the lower concentration. Quartz and tripoli, the exposure limit for those two in Ontario is 0.1 rather than cristobalite, which is 0.05. But what it tells you here is that you are exceeding the more conservative and stringent exposure limit by nearly 3,000%. And for those of you who adhere to an action level, and an action level is typically 50% of an OEL or an exposure limit. Sometimes a best practice tool for health and safety managers is to use a more prescriptive and a lower concentration so that we can see where we're sitting to avoid getting all the way up and suddenly being surprised when we exceed an exposure level. So if I was using an action level, it does provide you that information as well. And I would be potentially exceeding by 5,600%. So what you see here then is a lot of red text. You'll see an exclamation mark saying warning. You'll see these tabs will be in red. If you were sitting in the green, these would be green. And so here it's warning you that you have potentially quite a bit of an exceedance as compared to both the occupational exposure limit and the action level. And again, if you need to know what any of these definitions are, these are anything in blue are clickable hyperlinks, and they will take you to further descriptions or definitions as needed. So now we have this information, and what do we do next? Well, we click continue, and now you're getting into exposure control. So the tool is going to help you, the user, control those exposures, because now that you've seen the exposures, and in this case, we're well into over the potential for overexposures or exceedances, what do we do next? Well, the tool is going to suggest to you the hierarchy of controls. What can we do next, and what are the next steps? And the tool will take you through the 4 options: elimination, substitution, engineering controls, administrative controls, and lastly, it will suggest for you the appropriate personal protective equipment. I typically pause on this page just to see if there are any questions.
Yeah, you read my mind, Megan. I was just today, there was a question in the chat. I'm going to read you the question and I'll read you my answer, but I'm hoping you can expand on it. So the question is, are the data points specific to BC, or are there provinces or federal? So my answer was all of the above. It's actual real life respirable crystalline silica monitoring that was done, and all monitoring had to be documented as meeting the standard for occupational hygiene monitoring with appropriate QA, QC controls and validated laboratories doing the analysis. Can you expand on the monitoring data though?
Yes, well, you are 100% right, correct, Krista. But to give you a sense of where is this data being pulled from? A lot of it came from Quebec. It was from literature reviews as part of BCCSA's original development of the tool. A lot of it was Quebec data. There's also some British Columbia data, some scattered throughout Canadian data, a bit of federal data, and also I think there might have been a little bit of European data. But I have to say that the bulk of it actually simply based on literature reviews where they were pulling the data from. They found quite a few studies or papers that had good bulk data that came from the Quebec construction industry.
Thank you.
All right, so let's look at elimination and substitution. For those of you familiar with the hierarchy of controls, this is always something that we often jump over or we forget to consider, because often when a task needs to happen, a building is being built, a building is being demolished, we typically don't have the opportunity or the option to eliminate or substitute that silica exposure. So if you were to collect, but that being said, there is always that potential. Potentially, we could eliminate this need by adopting a different practice, a different work practice, perhaps. So in which case, let's say I was to select yes, well, then you will see a green banner that says, if you can eliminate this work activity, this exposure control plan is no longer necessary. And so it suggests that you return to your dashboard and delete this project. More often than not, though, we'll have to select no, because the activity that we're proposing that needs to get done will have to get done. So what the tool then says is if you select no, so you're going to see in the next few pages a couple of toggle options, yes or no, yes or no. And as you make a selection, it will add to your ECP, that very end deliverable that you'll get in documentation and conclusion. It will add sections so that every selection, every input you put along the way is going to be saved and assembled in an easy to replicate, printable, downloadable PDF. Engineering controls. Well, so here you're going to see, depending on the type of material you've selected, along with the process or the tool you've selected to that you're using along with the material, you're going to see different options. What you will see often is you do not intend to use an engineering control as a selection. Often you'll see engineering control is not listed. It's potentially there's a control that the tool simply doesn't have data for. And if the tool doesn't have that data, and another engineering control could very well exist, but if the tool doesn't have the data, it can't be selected. So you can always select this and you can manually type in the type of tool you're going to use, and it will carry over into your exposure control plan. But the tool itself won't be able to do, there's a second dial that we're going to see, and it won't be able to take, it won't have that data to pull from to then recalculate your potential or estimated exposure level. But what we do have to select from are wetting separate from the tool and wetting integrated to the tool. So let's start with selecting wetting integrated to tool. Now, under administrative controls, you are going to have 8 selections to make. The first one is inspections and maintenance. And in here, you again have to select yes or no. If you select no, the tool is prompting you in a red section to know that it's not going to include this option or this listing in your exposure control plan because you are telling the tool, no, I'm not going to use this. But if you were to select yes, you are telling the tool, this is great. I will be implementing inspections and maintenance, and the tool will say in green. It will add this as a control to your exposure control plan. And should you look at some of these sections and say, well, I'm not really sure what housekeeping means. How do we define housekeeping on a project site? You can click on criteria. These are actually tabs. They don't always lend themselves to a look that makes you think that they're clickable. But whenever you see blue text, it typically is a clickable option. And so here it defines what housekeeping must mean. And so if you were to select housekeeping as an administrative control, here are examples of how you would implement and ensure that housekeeping is happening on the site. You could also click proper practices. This will give you an idea of what should or should not be used, and dry sweeping should not be used. Use of compressed air for cleaning, certainly prohibited, as it is in most provinces and for many different types of products and designated substances. And then information. So this information will often link back to regulations where you might be able to find this information. If it exists in a regulation, it will link to it here. So if we go back to housekeeping under answer, this is where you have that option, yes or no. For the purposes of our scenario, let's select yes to everything. So number 3, hygiene, and it asks you that question. At the end of every shift, will workers and their personal protective equipment be decontaminated to prevent inadvertent secondary inhalation of respirable crystalline silica dust? And this will prompt me to say, yes, we will do this. So I'll select yes. Instruction and training. Are all workers trained, or have they been provided with information that would consist of training so that they're aware of the risks of silica dust exposure? Yes or no. Medical or emergency procedures. Does your sites, often construction sites, larger construction sites may have emergency response plans or emergency procedures? Does that response plan include what to do in case of a respirable crystalline silica dust exposure emergency? Yes or no. Sometimes it's a simple one-pager. And if you click yes, it will add some information to your exposure control plan, and you can build from that. Sometimes it will prompt you to think of something that needs to be done outside of the exposure control plan, something bigger, but often it will provide you with at least a paragraph of text, if not more, in your exposure control plan to help you adhere to these administrative controls that you've selected. Will work shift scheduling be considered as a way to limit the amount of time a worker is exposed to RCS dust? Could be yes, could be no. Let's select yes, just to keep everything in the green. And then separation from source, both enclosures and barriers. So barriers would be something along the lines of pylons or caution tape. An enclosure would be more so along the lines of a a full enclosure with poly sheeting and something that's been constructed, usually using HEPA airflow to collect and really isolate that work area to prevent a big creation and plume of dust that encompasses, especially when you're doing work inside. You have other workers that could be right next to that worker or in another room, and suddenly you have this huge plume of dust that's being created and can be entrained or basically end up in other places along that work site. As you click continue, every time you click continue, if you were to go back to your dashboard, your progress up until this point will be saved for you. It's an automatic save whenever you click continue. Now we're at a summary. Again, just a little quick summary. It tells you what you've selected under engineering controls, what selections you made under administrative controls, lists them here. If you want to change any of them, you can click these blue buttons, or alternatively, you can simply go to your left side menu and click back on these pages. They will bring you to the same location. Now here, I'll pause briefly to see if there are any questions in the chat.
None in the chat at this time.
Great. And so we're on a get prepared page. This is where you see your progress along this animated dashboard or path, really, that tells you, all right, we're through at least 50% of the work. Now everything else will be trending towards the end of the process. So this is when we click continue, the tool is going to take the engineering controls that you selected in exposure control section, is going to pull that data from, and it's going to present you with the dial that is a recalculation of the estimated exposure limit. Oh, here we are. So previously we were sitting around 1.4 without controls. And now that we have suggested, or we've told the tool that we are going to implement wetting integrated to tool, we have dropped our estimated exposure level quite a bit. In fact, dust has been reduced by 88%. The tool will tell you that percentage right here. This is your control impact on dust. However, as you can see on this, based on the dial, our needle is sitting still in the red. We would like it to be a green. Green means we are under the occupational exposure limit. But in this case, our suggested controls have done a great job. 88% is a really great percentage, but our workers there's still residual risk. Our worker still is potentially exposed, could be overexposed to silica dust as part of this process. So what do we do next? So here you have a combination. Whenever there's something, when you're sitting in the red, you'll see a lot of red text and a lot of red banners. But when something is going well and something is in the green, that means things have been controls have been selected that have helped. But what's nice about this scenario that we've selected is that there were 2 different engineering controls that we could select out of those 4 that could make a difference on the dust control. So here it's prompting us, do you wish to change engineering controls and run the analysis again? Well, yes, I do. Let's do that. Let's go back to this page here. So as you saw, these 2 selections here are simply selections that you could make, but they won't allow the tool to pull different data to provide you with a recalculated estimated exposure level. So what you can do, and some of the materials you select, you won't even see an option at all, simply because the tool has limitations. And if the data doesn't lend itself to showing accurate results with engineering controls in place, you won't have that option. So here we have 4 toggle buttons to select from, whereas if you had selected drywall, for example, you won't be seeing those same 4 controls. You will only see controls with data that the tool itself can show you. So let's select the first 2. I know for since they're both controls that are options, this will recalculate our estimated exposure limit or level, and it will show us potentially a new exposure level that I would like for it to be in the green rather than the red. So I'll select the second option, which is wetting separate from the tool. What will happen is as soon as you make there are certain pages where if you make changes, what was once a green checkmarked page will go back to gray because to click continue at the bottom of the page. It won't undo whatever you've saved in there to date. Typically, it won't undo that. As you can see, we've selected yes to all 8 of our administrative control toggle buttons. So all of that is still there, but it will prompt you for a few pages. You'll have to scroll down and you will have to click continue. It's just another little limitation of the tool. It's almost like you're telling it, I've made new selections. You now need to take them into account and then recalculate the tool or recalculate your exposure level. And so I've noticed that about the tool. But if you scroll down, you click continue a few more times, and now we are going to get a new calculation. Oh, look at that. We've dropped it even further. Your dust has now been reduced by 96%, and we're sitting very, very close to the occupational exposure limit, which is 0.05. We're just above it at 0.051. So something else about the tool, because it has so much data, it has data and data points in the background. What you will notice is if I was to look at this and say, oh gosh, well, I'm still in the red. It's, we still have further risk or residual risk I need to consider. Let's say my counterpart, my coworker down the hallway is also on the tool and they're doing the same calculation. They may have gotten just a little bit of a very slight different analysis. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that. So if you go back one page to the Get Prepared page and you click continue, you're forcing the tool to go into the background and start pulling randomized data based on the inputs we put in. And we've changed nothing other than we've asked the tool to recalculate. And here we're sitting acceptable. This is great. So my coworker down the hallway will say, oh, everything's good. Look at me. I'm sitting in the green. And I'll say, oh, but I just did exactly the same. I made the same request with the same information and the same material, but we were sitting just above the OEL, just a difference of 0.005 milligrams per cubic meter of air. So this is just, I shouldn't say a discrepancy. It has to do with the data that's being pulled. So what we're seeing here is we have the potential, we're very close to the OEL. Yes, if it's under, there's, a line has been drawn in the sand and the tool is going to show you green, a lot of green and check marks and acceptable level type descriptors when you are under that OEL of 0.05. However, please keep in mind that depending on slightly different timelines, activities, how the sampler might have been positioned that day, you could have a worker who is under the exposure level one day and the next day completing that same task might be just above it. Does anyone have any questions about that? That's a bit of a special nuance with the calculation, the exposure analysis with controls. I'm going to ask the tool to recalculate again because I was hoping to get it back into the red so that it would recommend personal protective equipment, but this is all right. These are our numbers. This is what we're working with. So as you progress through, we are getting very close to the end. So let's just continue on through. We'll hit continue. Here we're on a Get Prepared page. So now it's going to say the last level of control available to workers is always personal protective equipment. So respirators, disposable coveralls, that sort of thing. So now the tool is going to present recommended PPE. So for the purposes of this exposure control plan, because our silica exposure with controls dial is sitting under the OEL, the occupational exposure limit of 0.05, or technically just under, the tool is recommending, you'll see a lot of green. Protection is optional. So it will still recommend the correct respirator type. So a half elastomeric face piece, non-powered with either N100, R100, or P100 filters. So using HEPA filters for a half face piece. It's an optional as per the tool, but keeping in mind that you are very close to the OEL, it would be probably as a best practice, it would be wise to consider using that half face piece and having the worker wear a respirator simply because day to day exposures can change. On this page, you will have two personal protective equipment control toggle buttons. You'll have a yes or no here where you are going to be prompted to select will your workers have access to respirators. It will give you information on the criteria. If you are having workers that are wearing respirators, you should have a respirable protection program. And what does that look like? Proper practices and more information. But for the purposes of our exposure control plan, I will select yes, because if you select no, it will not include that to your ECP. And then our second toggle button option, yes or no down here, lends itself to washable or disposable coveralls. Will you have the workers in that area wearing either disposable coveralls like Tyvek, those Tyvek or polypropylene suits that you can remove and tear off and dispose of at the end of the day, or maybe disposable washable coveralls, which are left on site? You can select yes or no and continue. So here we are at documentation. So all the heavy lifting is done. All the questions and drop-down menus and information that you've put into the tool so far, which you can always navigate back to on the left side menu, that has been done. Now it's a lot. Now your tasks on each of these pages will simply be reading and understanding. So it will suggest to you to whom your exposure control plan should be distributed, how often it should be reviewed, record keeping, should it be kept on site for 2, 5, 10 years? It gives you suggestions. Also, along with your exposure control plan, it makes suggestions for other documentation you may need to keep, because these would be separate from your exposure control plan. Inspection records of equipment, any kind of fit testing records for respirators. Those are all, it's prompting you just to think of what else you might need and what else you might want to do part of the project itself. On this plan, this is called the ECP summary, exposure control plan summary. And so what you can do here, it's not very obvious, but there's a little option, save PDF or save PDF version of this page. And so if you were to click save PDF version, what it will do, it takes you to another page, and you click here again. It gives you, you can change your file name. This is your option to change the file name. I typically just keep it as is. It kind of creates a default naming convention. And if you click save ECP summary as PDF, it will, oops, I clicked it twice. It will save it as a downloadable option to your downloads folder. And it's a 3-page quick reference guide summary of your ECP. The ECP itself will be a much longer 12 to 14-page document that we'll see on the next page. But let's say you need, for some purposes, you needed a shorter 2 to 3 page version of your ECP. That is your first prompt. It actually prompts you to do that first. And then your second prompt is generate ECP. Again, file name. You could add to this file name if you wanted to put in a date or a project number or project code. You could change your file name. You generate ECP. It takes a few seconds and it will download itself for you up here. And let's take a quick look as to what it looks like. It's typically one of 12 pages. It includes your logo, your information, that information that you had on in your account information. And as you scroll down, it will give you a table of contents as to how the data will be presented. And it will have all the information that you selected. And unfortunately, it doesn't show that nice dial that we saw as we were going through the pages, but it'll give you all the precise information. You just won't see that dial again. The dial itself really is only, the 2 dials, I should say, are only presented within the tool as you are scrolling through and clicking on page by page. So before controls, after controls, and then it goes into PPE selected, administrative control selected, engineering control selected, etc. And your very last page is the conclusion page. It tells you here you've completed everything, all is done. There's a little bit more information. It prompts you to, if you have any feedback or you have suggestions or issues with the tool, you can enter that information here, click submit, and that will go to the developers of the tool itself. And then it asks you to either sign out or go back to your dashboard. And here to our dashboard and entry, same. This is a randomly allocated number by the system. So that 245, the system just gives you that number, but all the other information I can edit should I want to. I would simply have to reopen the tool, reopen that work plan and make edits within it, but you can change these details here. So now that we're back at the dashboard, this is where you can then scroll down. You can pick different projects. You can start from scratch. You can import data. Let's say I was going to school 1, 2, 3 next week, but we're doing the exact same type of work with all the exact same materials. So I simply want to import this data, create a new, I'll call it line item or a new work plan. And you can just enter in the new information if anything changes. And then you get another work plan or ECP for that next site. and so on. So this is good. This is the end of the demonstration. Does anybody have any questions?